my life. In fact, as far as Latvia is concerned, I've been explaining Latvia ever since I was born, particularly because I grew up in the United States. And when you're outside of your home country, other people ask about it. And a country like Latvia, which was occupied for 50 years, was not that well known. And so you spend a lot of time explaining. And it's very important not only to promote your country for economic or political reasons, but just to have people understand, you know, who you are culturally and why you're as important as anyone else is in the world. I've had the honor and the pleasure of the last 25 years of working with the Latvian government in various capacities, and it's basically the goal is to try to help Latvia return to the world community, which we've done very successfully through NATO, through the European Union. Nowadays, I see that even more our goal is to help our neighboring countries, and this is where, for Latvia, the Eastern Partnership, countries like Ukraine, Belarus, Georgia, Moldova are so important because we've succeeded to restore democracy and a normal way of life, and we see that others are trying to do the same thing. We want to help them. But to do that, we need the full support of Europe, of 28 countries, plus if we look at NATO, the United States. And their communication becomes essential because nobody will come and join you or help you if you can't explain why. And unfortunately today, if we talk about the geopolitical situation, we are involved in an information warfare era where everybody is using information to promote their own interests.
It's true, but even without it, it's still, even those people who kind of not influenced by propaganda or not influenced by myths, they still struggling to understand why they should care about what's happening in Eastern Europe?
Well, that's where the explanation is important because they need to be told how this could affect their lives in the long run, whether from a security point of view. For example, when the Malaysian plane was shot down over Ukraine, there were Dutch and other Europeans on that airplane. They never dreamt that a conflict in eastern Ukraine would affect their lives. Same thing with what's happening in Syria, Iraq, and Northern Africa. The migrant crisis has now come to Europe. If you do not solve crises in other parts of the world, sooner or later it'll come to you, even as countries as far away as the United States. So people have to realize that it's like preventive health care. You have to try to nip these things in the bud. At the same time, when it comes to information, I don't believe in censorship. I used to work a long time ago in advertising. Everybody is out trying to promote their own ideas, their products. You cannot ban lies or bad information, but you can defeat them. And you can only do that by providing better information. I think the other thing that's important in Europe and elsewhere is that people know where they're getting their information from. What is the source so they can judge it better, so they can analyze it better, and then understand which way to go. So today we live in a world where the problem isn't a shortage of information, it's a surplus.
Exactly. But all the countries, especially in Eastern Europe, they are dealing with the same dilemma right now because governments are trying to introduce bans, or they ban Russian channels, or they ban outlets that spread lies or misinformation, and they label them as national security. When in fact, where do you see this balance between basically defending freedom of speech, whatever that means, or whatever way a person uses it, and defending national interest? Because propaganda actually is very dangerous because it destroys lives and it's the root of conflicts and has a profound effect. But where do you see that balance?
Well, it goes back to that old debate about freedom of speech. Can you yell fire in a crowded theater? I mean, if you endanger lives by what you're saying, then yes, that should be illegal. But there's a very fine line because a lot of things that people say may be emotional, they may create emotion, but you can't always say that you're not inciting violence. I believe very much in freedom of speech. I think people have to be exposed to all kinds of ideas, but we have to help them understand what those are. And we see the same problem. It's not so much just propaganda that may be coming from Russia. We're looking at ISIS, we're looking at terrorist organizations. On the one hand, they are endangering our lives of what they are promoting, and yet they want to create a society where they totally control information. They want to prevent how we talk and what we talk about, whether it's criticism of Danish caricatures or cartoons. We have to learn to respect different cultures and different standards. And different countries will have their own standards. I respect a country's standards and values when I am there, but they cannot impose them on me here. But when it comes to the information space, which nowadays is a free-for-all with internet, I think what we have to do is not so much ban information, but just help people understand what it is, where it's coming from, what is true, what isn't true. And people have to work at it. They can't have it all handed to them.
Yeah, investing in, for example, independent journalism.
Yeah.
My last quick question is, again, related to building bridges and explaining developments to larger audiences. It's true that the security issues related to the conflict, geopolitical drama in this region are very important. So basically, you do not have any more local conflicts in the globalized world. Everything is being affected.
Right.
But at the same time, the other, less just say sexy issue of international law and assault on international law is something that personally I find very hard to explain to larger audiences back in the States. Why do they should even care about the international law and what is happening with Crimea, Eastern Ukraine, or Georgia is the biggest assault on this system since the invention. How would you explain this to back in the States if doesn't it even have do we have to even do this?
Well, I think the United States is a unique example because it's a country that doesn't have many neighbors, and the two that it has are not really a threat, unless the Americans think Mexican immigrants are a threat. It's much more
Canadian.
Real. Right. It's much more real in Europe, where historically we've seen what happens when neighboring countries invade others. But we still, I think what the Americans need to understand is that if they do not stand up for territorial integrity and sovereignty in other parts of the world, sooner or later that conflict could come to them. And here again, like I gave the example of the Malaysian flight in Ukraine, whether it's terrorism, if you do not respect international law elsewhere, if you don't stand up for it, then people are going to take advantage of that, and it could hit New York, it could hit San Francisco. I think, like you said, we live in a globalized society, and more people have to understand that whatever happens on the other side of the planet, whether it's climate change or natural disasters, does eventually come back to you, and we have to look at things globally.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.